Hey guys.
Hey everybody.
Welcome to another Travel Therapy Mentor live Sunday night video. Tonight we're going to be talking about why we don't take international travel contracts. This is a question we got a ton at CSM. I would bet that at least 30 or 40 times I got the question, okay, if you take contracts all around the country, have you ever thought about taking international contracts? I think every traveler thinks about this. It's definitely something that we thought we might do in the beginning. We definitely considered until we did more research. So tonight we want to talk about why we don't and why we don't really recommend it to a lot of other people either. We also get this question a lot because we take these long international trips and people assume that if we're going out of the country for 5 months, we must be working while we're gone. And so yeah, that's not necessarily the case. We're normally just traveling for fun. So we're going to talk about all that. Whitney's going to introduce us and then we'll jump into why we don't take international travel contracts.
All right. Hey y'all, my name is Whitney Aiken.
And I'm Jared Cazazza.
And we are both the traveling physical therapists, and we run the website Travel Therapy Mentor. So as Jared mentioned, he's going to share our video in a couple of groups so that more people can join on with us live. Like he said, we try to do these videos every week, usually on Sunday nights. Sometimes they're on different nights, just depends on our travels. We travel a lot within the U.S. as travel PTs, travel physical therapists, and we also do a lot of travels just for fun outside of work, as Jared kind of mentioned, traveling internationally, traveling domestically. Right now we're actually off of work. We're not working as travel PTs at the moment. I finished up a contract recently, a few weeks ago in North Carolina, and now we are on what we like to call fun employment, so unemployed by choice. We are getting ready to go on a big international trip where we'll be gone for 5 months. So this is kind of what's sparking tonight's conversation. Is quite often people will see us on social media that see that we're taking a lot of time off and we're in other countries, and they're like, oh wow, are you working overseas? What are you doing over there? So we have to answer this question a lot, and we just finished up at the conference CSM in Denver, the big national physical therapy conference, and we got that question a lot about working overseas. People who are new to travel therapy say, oh, does your company or the company that you work with, the staffing agency, do they staff overseas? And they're really excited about that idea. They think of travel therapy as traveling beyond the U.S. borders, which in some cases it can be. But tonight we're going to kind of talk about some of those differences and why we've chosen not to go that route. Because primarily what we do and what most travel therapists do is just traveling within the U.S. So thank you guys for joining us again. If any of you are joining on live, I see a few of you are on. We'd love to if you would say hello in the comments and just let us know who you are. Tell us if you're a current PT, OT, speech therapist, if you're a student, if you're someone who's looking into travel therapy. Just let us know in the comments and say hello so we know that you're joining us tonight.
Yeah, if any of you guys were on last week's video, that was crazy. We don't know what happened there. Only thing we can figure out is that the video must have been shared in like a auction group that we are not a part of, but someone must have shared it in there, and so it was very weird. But
yeah, if you're intrigued, go back and watch last week's video. We got trolled pretty hard by some couch auction people, so who knows, maybe the couch auction people will join us again tonight. But we're not on a couch today, we're in chairs.
Yeah.
We're back home in Virginia. So just a couple quick announcements about us. We're home in Virginia for a couple weeks. We just finished at CSM in Denver, and then in 2 weeks we're going to be going and speaking, giving a talk on travel therapy to the students at the North Carolina Student Conclave. So if you're a student in North Carolina, we'll see you next week at the at High Point University at the NC Student Conclave. And then, as I kind of alluded to, in a couple weeks here, March 11th, we will be leaving the country for 5 months. So what does that mean for us and for Travel Therapy Mentor? Not a whole lot. You'll still actually see us every week. As long as we have a good Wi-Fi connection, we still will be doing our live videos pretty much every week. We'll still be putting out content on our Facebook page and on our website at traveltherapymentor.com. If you guys want to follow us on Instagram at Travel Therapy Mentor, that's where I will share a lot of the photos. We're going to be traveling through, 15 or so countries?
Yeah, 15 or 16 countries.
In Latin America. So we're going to start in Mexico, drop down to South America, do all of South America, come back through Central America.
Not all, but
most. Venezuela's not on the list. Brazil's not on the list. Most of South America, most of Central America, and then back to Mexico. So if you guys are interested in following along with our journey and our adventures, Travel Therapy Mentor on Instagram is where you'll see most of the pictures. But as I said, feel free to continue to reach out to us for mentorship and education. If you're a current travel therapist or someone who's thinking about travel therapy, don't feel like you're bothering us at all. We work on the websites and continue to do all of our social media while we travel.
Yep. Hey Melody, hey Ryan, hey Cody, thank you guys for joining.
Hey guys, thank you for joining us.
So, yeah, we got this question a ton at CSM. We get this question a lot on from people that follow the website. We have an article about international travel on Travel Therapy Mentor website. Like I said, initially we thought that we probably would take international contracts. We were very interested in that. We were looking into it. There were a few things that changed our opinion on it. One is the hassle of getting licensed in other states, or other countries. So obviously, if we're going to be working as PTs in another country, we ideally would want to go to an English-speaking country. There are some PTs that are probably more adventurous than us that maybe we would go to, a non-English-speaking country and just try to make do, which I think would be very tough. But yeah, so we would go to English-speaking countries, which mainly limits us, a little bit to like Australia, New Zealand, the UK. So those are the main places that people.
Or South Africa.
Yeah, those are the main places that people are looking for contracts as travel PTs or travel therapists.
Unless you're Brittany, who just joined us. Hey, Brittany, who's thinking about, I think it's
Belgium,
either Belgium or the Netherlands, probably Belgium.
Yeah,
Brittany
sure
is looking into being a traveling therapist there, or an international physio.
Yeah, so Brittany, if you found out anything about that, definitely let us know. We have limited knowledge on this. This is mostly what we've researched. We haven't really dove into the process of trying to travel internationally, but we did some research and this is what we've found.
Yeah.
So hey Brittany, hey Sierra, hey Sandy, thanks for joining.
Yep. Oh, Belgium. Yeah, so Brittany might be able to provide us a little bit more insight, but...
So the hassle of getting licensed, that is a huge thing. When we looked into it, it can take up to 3 to 6 months to get licensed in other countries, or even longer depending on the country. So obviously that's a pain. And finding contracts is more difficult, and usually the contracts are longer. So, and it makes sense. If you're going to get licensed in another country, and they're going to wait for you to get licensed or whatever, they're not going to want you to just be there 3 months. So a lot of the contracts that we've seen are 6 months or longer, maybe even a year.
Mm-hmm. So the things, when Jared's talking about getting licensed, there's a lot that goes into working in another country. First is the language barrier. Second is you have to have a work visa to be allowed to work in any capacity in another country. So you can't just go there on a regular tourist visa. And even certain countries like, say, the UK, where you don't even need a visa to travel there for a short period of time. Like you can go to certain countries as an American citizen for a short period of time without even having a visa. But if you're planning on staying for a longer period, or you're planning on having any type of employment, whether you were going to go there and be a tour guide or a barista or a therapist, you have to get a work visa. And there are certain steps that you have to go through to get that, and it can be a little complicated and time consuming. Once you get a work visa, then you also have to check with their licensing body. So whatever, for example, if you're a physical therapist, there will be a physio licensing board. So, kind of like we have the APTA, or if you're a speech-language pathologist, we have the speech pathology board in the United States. You have to check with the board for whatever that country is to see whatever their regulations and rules are. And in a lot of circumstances, you might have to have them verify that your educational requirements from your country, in our case America, match their educational requirements for their country. So you have to go through the country to get the work visa, the legislator or the licensing board to make sure that your educational requirements and your licensing lines up with what they need to do. You have to make sure you speak the language, and then also you have to look for a job. So that's what Jared was getting ready to talk about, was just the process of finding these contracts. A lot of people ask us, okay, the companies, the travel agencies and staffing agencies that you guys work with, do they staff internationally? Under most circumstances, they don't. These are going to be completely different staffing agencies that you're looking at, or under most circumstances, you would actually just have to identify and find a job, a specific clinic that would be willing to sponsor you to come over there and work with them, and just find that job on your own, not necessarily through an agent.
Yeah. So a lot, all this pretty much means that there's more hassle. Along with that hassle is almost always more money. So all these things and really depends on what your situation is back home, why you're trying to get licensed in these other countries, or other country if you're trying to do that. Because if you're going without work for all this time, that's a terrible thing. But ideally you'd be doing this while you're working. But still, the licensing and getting sponsored to work in another country costs money and takes time.
Mm-hmm. So in our personal opinion, this is just way too much hassle. The other thing is considering the pay. We haven't done a ton of research into it. I know that Kiara commented and said that she thinks, in her experience, the pay that she's seen for New Zealand, Australia is pretty similar for OTs. It might be pretty similar. We've also seen in some cases it's a little bit lower, depending on the country.
Kiara, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're probably talking about the pay being similar to permanent jobs in the U.S., right? Because so what we've seen is that for travel contracts, they're not really the travel contracts that we think of in the U.S. where we get tax-free stipends and the pay is, in general, much higher than a permanent job. So I usually tell people that if you work 48 weeks a year, you might make 50% to 100% more than a permanent job. So yeah, pay might be comparable in another country to a permanent job in the U.S., but that's still not really comparable to travel contracts. So basically the reason that we decided not to, in addition to the hassle, is that pay. So we could go to, say, the UK and work and make probably less than we would as a permanent therapist in the US, or we could work 2 contracts in the US, 6 months, make as much as we would an entire year in the UK, and then go to the UK for 6 months and travel around. So either way, we're getting to spend time there, but in one case, we have all this additional hassle, we don't make as much money. In the other case, we get to go there as tourists and really enjoy the whole area, travel around, see everything. So when we thought about that, we thought about those 2 options. It made a lot more sense for us to say, okay, instead of doing any kind of international travel contracts, let's take 1 or 2 contracts a year in the US, make a lot of money, save it, and then spend the rest of the year traveling to these countries that we want to go to instead of working there.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
So if anybody has been following our story, if you watch our videos or have looked at our social media before, we've designed a lifestyle around this. So quite often you'll see us on social media and you're like, wow, they've been in Europe for like several months. They must be working over there, right? Like, who's taking off several months from work? Well, we actually are. So we've designed our lifestyle around this by just being travel PTs within the U.S. Like Jared said, we'll take 1 or 2 travel contracts a year, save all that money because you make a significant amount of money as a travel therapist, and as long as you're smart with your finances, you can save a significant portion of that to be able to take additional time off. I would say the majority of travel therapists don't do it exactly like we do, where they work 3 to 6 months, take 3 to 6 months off. They might work 3 months, take 1 week off or 1 month off, work 3 more months, take another week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks off, and kind of do it that way. Instead, what we've done, if you followed our story before, you already know this. The first 3 years of our travel therapy career in the U.S., we worked nonstop, back-to-back contracts.
Not nonstop, we worked a lot.
We worked pretty much nonstop, where we would only take a few days to maybe a week off between a contract here and there. The first 3 years, and then we saved up a significant portion of our income. So then after our 3rd year of working full-time, we got to where we were just doing this 1 contract a year or 2 contracts a year and taking about 6 to 8 months of time off in a row to do whatever we want. In 2018, we took 4 months and traveled around Southeast Asia for 4 months. In 2019, we took, or it was 5 months.
We took 4 months in Asia, 1 month in Europe in 2018. And then
Yeah.
2019, we spent 4 months in Europe traveling
All
around
in Europe. And then in 2020, we're getting ready to spend 5 months in Latin America, South, Central America, and Mexico. Not working. We still will be doing our blog and that sort of thing. But even without our blog, even without making any money online, we were doing this back in 2018, where we were just living off our income from being travel PTs in the U.S. And I tell you that because it's replicable.
Yeah.
A lot of people look at us and they think, well, you guys are bloggers. You guys must make money online. That's how you're able to afford to take 5 months off and travel overseas. But that's not the case.
Yeah.
It's replicable. You guys can do this too.
Yeah, and that's what when I talk to a lot of the students that came up at CSM were asking these kind of questions, I recommend very similar to what we did, maybe not as long as we did in the beginning. So I told pretty much everybody, I think, what the ideal situation, because I think almost anybody that's young and adventurous wants to travel to other countries, and that's why this question about should I work in other countries as a traveler comes up all the time. And what I'd recommend to all those people, and probably a lot of you guys, is work 1 or 2 years as much as you can. Try to save as much as you can. Live pretty frugally, try to work overtime if you can, try to work a PRN job on your contracts, but work as a travel therapist in the US, save a lot of that extra money. Then start doing what we're doing, work maybe 2 contracts a year. And most people, if they're living fairly frugally, traveling fairly frugally, can cover all of their expenses pretty easily with just 2 travel contracts in the US. And then you can spend the other 6 months, if you want, traveling internationally and seeing all these places that you want to see. I think that is kind of the best of both worlds. Instead of trying to work in another country and making lower income and then still trying to explore on the weekends, and it's kind of tiring. Any travel therapist in here, you probably know that when you go on a contract, there's a lot you want to see around the area. You do a lot of weekend trips, which is great. We do that too. But it does get tiring when you're working all week and then you're doing a weekend trip, and then you're working all week and you're doing a weekend trip. It doesn't leave you a lot of time to really enjoy the exploring. Whereas like our long trips where we're in a city for a whole week and we have nothing to do except explore, I think we get a lot more out of that.
Yeah. I will say if you're really set on working internationally, there are some pros to that. So it's kind of like when, we haven't taken any contracts on the West Coast yet, right? But we have visited the Midwest and a little bit of the West for fun. Well, it's quite different just traveling there as a tourist for a weekend or a couple days versus living in the West Coast or whatever and working there as a travel therapist. So there is something to be said for living somewhere for several months at a time and becoming part of that community. And it's the same thing for international travel. So I know Kiara mentioned that she's interested in working and living in New Zealand or Australia. Yes, you would get a very different experience working there for 6 months to a year and becoming part of that community. And if that's something you really crave and you really desire, go for it. For us, that's not something that was on the priority list. We kind of want to visit a lot of different places and see a lot of different places, and then maybe later, if we want to, we'll go back there for a longer period of time. The longest we spent 1 month in Chiang Mai, Thailand. Most other places that we visit, we'll stay for 1 to 2 weeks or less. There is a trade-off there. If you really, truly want to just become part of the community, it's not all about the money to you, and you're willing to go through that hassle and that rigor, the licensing process, the work visa and all that, then maybe it is for you. So far we have not done a significant amount of the research to figure out how the logistics of how to go about that, because it's going to be different for each country. So you're going to have some research to do on your own. In the future we might research a little bit more with staffing agencies that can help you guys out. We do have a fellow therapist, Tori Frost, who wrote an article for our website about living and working in Australia, and she works there as a permanent employee. She's not like doing locums or short terms. So she has some valuable information for those that want to work in Australia as far as their licensing boards and that sort of thing. So you would need to look into that for each individual country, and then you'd need to put in a lot more legwork to find yourself a job. And you might need to accept that it's not going to be these short-term hop-around type locums. It could be longer, 6 month to 12 month commitments. So if that is something you're interested in, it is an option. It's just not something we've chosen to do.
Yep. So we're going to go through some comments, talk a little bit more about this. But first, if you guys are getting value from this, if you're enjoying our content, what we talk about, please like this video, give us a heart or whatever. Because the more engagement we get, the more people see this video, and the more information we can spread to everybody.
Yeah, and if you guys feel like this is valuable information that a friend or a classmate or a fellow therapist of yours that would enjoy learning about, please tag them in the comments and just share this video with them so they can learn as well.
Yeah, so Kiara said that she was talking about perm, and that in the UK perm pay is very low. We've heard that for sure. And even travel pay is not that high there. And so that's usually most people, I think, that are thinking about working internationally are usually thinking about the UK or about Australia. And yes, I think Australia and New Zealand do pay higher, but you have to remember that I think cost of living, at least in the bigger cities in Australia and New Zealand, is pretty high as well.
Yeah.
And she said that's exactly what she plans to do. Nobody's trying to work the whole year. Yeah, exactly. We definitely agree with that. I just want to work to fund my travels. Exactly.
That's how we all feel, Kiara. So Jessie says that she's curious about how we save money to travel for a third to half of the year.
Okay, so I wrote an article about this a long time ago, maybe 3 or 3.5 years ago, on the Fifth Wheel PT website. In reality, if you're working as a travel therapist and you're trying to, if you're lenient on the setting you go to, you're lenient on the location, and you'll go to some rural areas, you can make enough in 6 months that it's very comparable to what you'd make in a year as a permanent therapist. So what that means is, if you just take 2 travel contracts a year, if you can work some overtime, if you can work PRN possibly, you can make as much as you would as a permanent therapist that works all 12 months, which means that you have the other half of the year that you can travel. So that's basically how we do it. I mean, there's nothing real special. We're living pretty frugally when we're traveling. We're living pretty frugally in our regular life, and then we're saving that money and taking the time off to go.
And part of that living frugally, Jessie, is just keeping your fixed expenses low. So the next question that we have from the next person is actually about your tax home. And the fact that when you're a travel therapist, you have to maintain a tax home. So if you can keep your expenses as low as possible at your tax home, so for example, we rent a room in a house from a family member, is how we keep our tax home. So we pay relatively low rent and low utilities throughout the year. We also don't have car payments. We have used vehicles that are paid off. We don't maintain any debt outside of just our student loan debt. We pay off our credit cards every month. We use credit cards to our advantage. The other part of it is keeping our expenses low while we're traveling. So we use credit card rewards to travel. We use Airbnb quite a bit. Like Jared said, on our website, on our blog, not our Travel Therapy Mentor website, but our blog, fifthwheelpt.com, Jared writes about every single one of his expenses on these trips and talks about how we're able to save so much.
Yeah, and I really think that if you've never done a really long trip, like say 2 months or more out of the country, you might not understand how cheaply you can travel. Because, if you do say 1 week or 2 weeks a year on a vacation, you normally spend a lot of money during that time. But the way we travel is, if we're going to a country like Thailand or last year we spent the entire 4 months in Europe, and I still only spent in like a 4-month period about $6,000. So we keep our expenses pretty low by doing things like Airbnb, using airline points for flights, sometimes using hotel points for free hotel stays. We're not eating extravagant dinners every night. We eat out some, but we're trying to conserve money. So if you approach it that way and look more like trying to visit a place and live more like a local would live and not like an extravagant vacation, you really don't have to spend that much.
But even, I honestly think, Jesse, what we've done is to the extreme. And I say that all the time. Most travelers don't do it the way we've done it.
Yeah.
I would say it's probably more realistic for someone who's going to work about 9 months out of the year and then maybe travel about 3 out of the year, which I think is very realistic.
Yeah.
Like Jared and I have been able to save, 80% plus of our income every month when we're working as travel therapists. And over those first 3 years, us both being DPTs, both being travelers, we've saved a significant amount of money to be able to fund our travels and fund our lifestyle. But even if you're a solo traveler, even if you don't save, if you just save 50% of your income, you can still come out really ahead by being a travel therapist and being smart with your money.
Yeah, and so the comment about do we rent our tax home? No, but we are renting a room in a house like Whitney said, and it's very cheap. So we're paying about $400 a month each, and we maintain that while we're out of the country. But that's not a huge amount. That's $4,800 a year that we're paying to maintain our tax home.
Yeah.
So
unlike someone who might have a big mortgage, if you have a mortgage, if you have a house, it might be something where you consider renting out your tax home while you're gone to save on some of those expenses, and have a tenant or someone trying to help you offset those expenses, or renting it out short term on Airbnb. Something like that might be an option.
So Jesse said, what if you have tons of student loans and other debts as well? So student loans is a interesting topic. We have chosen to go on an income-based repayment plan. We've talked about this in the past, and I've written a ton of articles on why we chose to go that route. So there are different ways that you can approach student loans. In terms of other debts, like credit card debt or like car loan debt or anything like that, I would pay that off before you ever start.
It needs to be a priority.
Yeah,
to
before
get
you
those
ever
high
start doing
interest
long
debts.
trips, get that out of the way. Student loans are a little bit different because the interest rates are not as high. Usually the debts are higher. You might be able to do income-based like we have done, but it just depends. But yeah, any other debts, get rid of those. Student loans, you might be able to work around.
Yeah. We got a few more comments, but I definitely have some other things I want to talk about. Kiara led perfectly into this.
Yeah.
That's the next thing I was going to talk about. So Kiara said, working for the Department of Defense is an option for people that may want to live abroad. They usually have jobs in Germany, South Korea, and Japan. Exactly.
Yes. So this is an area that we know some other PTs and some other people that work on Army bases or military bases abroad, and that is another very good option. If we were going to do that, working and living internationally like that, it would probably be this path instead
Absolutely.
of taking just a random travel contract in another country. We would probably work on a military base.
So what this is, if you guys are not familiar, is there's a website called usajobs.gov. You can go on there and search via the Department of Defense and see which openings and what needs they have for civilian contractors to work on military bases throughout the world. So they will employ physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech language pathologists in other countries on American bases. So you're making American money, you're working for the U.S. government, you're working on an American base, so you're speaking English, you're working with American citizens, active duty independents. In some cases, these contracts are competitive. It just depends on the location. The more desirable the location, the more competitive it might be. Typically, these contracts, I want to say, are about a year. So you're not going to get these short-term locum travel type contracts. It's going to be, you have to commit for about a year usually. But it's definitely something to look into, because I think it's an easier path. You know, you're working with other Americans, you're employed by the U.S. government, you're speaking English, you're making American dollars, but you still, on the weekends and every day, are living in Germany or South Korea or wherever you might be.
Yeah, the only difference and the only reason that might not be appealing to some people is you obviously won't get as an authentic of an experience of another country, because a military base in Germany probably feels exactly like a military base in the U.S. There's probably not a lot of German culture that permeates around a military base.
Yeah.
So it might be a little different, but that's probably the route that we would go.
But still, on the weekends, you can integrate with that community. You can find other outlets to integrate with that community while you're there. And maybe the people who have been there for a long time can help you understand the culture and the language and the food and all that a little bit more. And you would, again, get to be there a longer period, hopefully about a year. So it would still be, I think, an amazing experience. So if that's something that interests you, we would recommend you check out usajobs.gov.
Yeah. And I'm sure some of those jobs can be kind of competitive, but it would be cool.
Okay, so Brittany is going to tell us a little bit about her experience with trying to work as a therapist in Belgium. So Brittany has a significant other that lives in Belgium, and she says that in her case, she would choose to do a marriage visa instead of a work visa. So that's an option. But but guys, note to self: don't try to go get married just to get a job over there. Find the love first, and if that's something that interests you, maybe go that route.
Yeah.
But don't try to do an arranged marriage just to get a visa to work over there. But in her case, she has a love interest there. She would do a marriage visa instead of a work visa. She says she's already interviewed for a position. Oh, I didn't know this. The interview went great, but the process is a bit of time, like what you said. I have a few links now on how to do the credentialing process that I can forward to you later. Perfect, we would love that. It would not be a contract job, she says. She did not find any contract jobs. The majority of the jobs there as physios are contractors, and you rent out space, etc. This clinic is 30 to 40 minute treats. He charges 40 euros per 30 minutes. Interesting. Makes his own schedule, sees 8 patients a day, 5 days a week. Sounds like a cool setup, Brittany.
Not bad.
She says, I'll give you more info later. The lower income does suck, but I would have to move there permanently.
Yeah. I mean, obviously Brittany's situation is different than someone that just wants to travel internationally to work temporarily. But yeah, that actually does sound like a decent situation. That was probably not the kind of situation you'd get if you were going to work a temporary contract job, because, I mean, there's probably going to be a lot that goes into that.
Yep. Okay, we got a couple more comments here. Kiara says you can also go through a contract company to contract on base in another country. Interesting. So again, there's a lot that we have not looked into in terms of all these details, but we're just kind of bringing you guys the information we do have.
That was in response to...
Oh, Cody is talking about in response to the question about the tax home.
Yeah.
Yeah, just how to maintain your bills while you're gone. Okay, Andy has some information for us. A lot of times that you're not eligible to get a work visa until you get a job offer letter. So we've heard that both for Americans trying to go other places or people trying to come to America. We have quite a few people that are from other countries reach out to us and ask if they can be travel therapists in the U.S. Like someone from Canada contacted us today. And that's what we've heard quite often is you have to have what's called like a sponsorship letter, where this clinic is saying that I'm sponsoring you to come and work here before the government will even issue you that work visa. So you have to look into all that fine print depending on the country you want to go to.
Yep.
Brittany says, in regards to Belgium, I was told that the process to work internationally in Belgium always is faster from being in the U.S. with our degree than anywhere else because it is a doctorate degree. The pay is lower because of the universal health care. Good to know.
We've heard that a lot. So I would imagine that most people going from the U.S. to another country would have less hassle than going from another country to the U.S. Because our education is basically the highest it could be for PTs. And yes, in terms of universal health care, I think that plays a pretty big role. We know
because they're not private companies.
Yeah, we know an SLP that works in Scotland that gets paid pretty low. She's from Scotland, but her pay, she was telling us about it, it's very low compared to what she could make in the U.S. So I think that's pretty much universal. Countries that have universal health care are usually not paying their providers as much.
Jessie says that before PT school, she traveled for 4 months in Southeast Asia. That's awesome. We also spent about 4 months in Southeast Asia. I love this model, and it's very inexpensive once you're there.
Very inexpensive. So I wrote about our travel in Southeast Asia, and in 5 months I spent $6,000. So basically, averaged $1,200 a month for my own personal expenses in Southeast Asia. So yeah, it can be extremely cheap.
I got some little comments about finding love abroad here. So yeah, guys, there's so much to think about, but kind of in summary here in regards to our choice.
Well, real quick, hey Craig, thanks for joining and congrats on the job coming up.
Yep. It's just, to us, it's too much hassle, personally, to try to work overseas, to make it worth. We come out way ahead by working within the U.S., earning U.S. dollars, earning the higher income as travel therapists that we make within the 50 states. For those who want to know about the companies that we work with, they primarily always staff within the 50 states. Occasionally, we do know a couple companies that will staff in the U.S. territories, so that could be kind of like an experience of working overseas.
Yeah,
you
like
know,
the Virgin Islands.
in the Virgin Islands or Puerto Rico. But it's exactly the same. You just get a license in one of the Virgin Islands or Puerto Rico the same way you would get a license in one of the 50 states. And that's actually relatively easy. You don't have to do work visas or additional requirements. So if you just have an itch to work in another culture, in another area, maybe think about the Caribbean as an option. Again, usjobs.gov, working on a base is an option. Another thing I just want to throw out there is if you really have an itch to work in another community or experience what it's like to be a healthcare provider in another country, volunteer trips are always an option. So maybe you wouldn't go there. Yeah, maybe a mission trip. We just recently had someone reach out to us, one of our followers that's also a travel therapist, and they said, hey, have you guys ever thought about doing a mission trip somewhere like Belize? And they had just done 2 weeks there, and they worked in the clinic. They had a really good experience. So if anybody's interested in that, there's lots of opportunities for that. Of course, you're not getting paid, but you are giving back, and you're getting that local feel for a few weeks or a couple months if you have the time.
Yeah. I think really, in summary, the people that ask this question, it really you have to ask yourself why you'd want to work internationally. Is it because you want to explore internationally, or is it because you really have a desire to maybe at some point move to another country to live and work? Mm-hmm. If it's just to explore internationally, I think you would come out a lot better doing what we're doing, working in the U.S. and then traveling for fun abroad. But if it's that you might consider moving to another country and staying there permanently, then maybe it makes sense for you to go test it out for 6 months or a year, even though you know you're not going to make as much, and you know that you're not going to be able to do as much exploring while you're working during the week, obviously.
Yeah.
So really it depends.
Or if there's a certain culture that you're just very interested in, maybe you really want to learn more about Japanese culture and you really have a high desire to work over there for a while, or take a job on a U.S. military base to get to know more about Japanese culture or German culture, whatever it might be, then that's your prerogative. We can definitely try to point you guys in the right direction from our limited knowledge, but there's a lot of research that goes into it. We'd encourage you guys to do your due diligence there, and just understand that the majority, vast 99.9% of everything that we always talk about and every travel company that you hear of, these are all just talking about traveling within the 50 states as an American citizen. If you're someone who's watching this and you're not an American citizen, in most cases this doesn't apply to you, because usually we're talking about U.S. citizens staffing within the U.S. There are certain circumstances where someone who's not a U.S. citizen can work in the U.S., but again, they have to go through that process with our work visa and our educational requirements and all that. It's quite complicated, actually.
Yep. Hey Matt, hey Darty, thanks for joining.
So Matt said, which missions have you done? So we actually haven't done any mission trips, Matt, but we've been thinking about it as something in the future. Like I said, some folks just reached out to us and asked if we had any interest in going to this clinic that they were at in Belize. It's not something we've looked into, but we are thinking about it for the future.
We would love to do it with like a group of, other therapists. I think it would be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I don't know if we would want to do it by ourselves, but if there was like a group going in the future.
There's a couple of the travel agencies that we work with that actually sponsor, like Med Travelers, who we did our trip to CSM with. I think they do one. I think Comp Health does one. There's a couple of groups that do these sponsored mission trips with therapists and usually physicians and PAs and nurses as well. So cool opportunities, not paid, of course, but it would be a wonderful opportunity, one that you wouldn't soon forget.
Yep. Hey Annie,
Matt,
thanks for joining.
Hey Darty. Matt mentioned one more thing. He said, let's get on with telehealth.
Yeah, it's an option.
So that is something that we didn't have that we were going to mention. We actually thought about that before because we spend quite a lot of time overseas just traveling for fun, and we kind of are what they call like digital nomads, where we have an online business. We have our website, Travel Therapy Mentor, and we continue to do our work online while we're abroad. So telehealth, if you could find a way to do telehealth while you're abroad and still be treating U.S. patients and making U.S. dollars while working online, would be an awesome option. So that's something to look into if you guys ever think about that.
Yep.
We have a couple more things, a couple more comments here. Again, if you guys are getting any value out of this, we would love if you could just give us a thumbs up, like this video, leave us a comment. We'll definitely continue to answer a few more comments here.
Yep.
Cody says, Ariel and I will join you. Just give us some advanced dates. Yeah, we'll definitely look into it.
Yeah.
Matt says, stand for Haiti with Institute of Clinical Excellence.
I haven't heard of that, but I know ICE is a really good company, so I would like to check that out.
Andy says, raised his hand, I immigrated to the U.S. from Taiwan. So many hoops. Yeah, we have heard.
Yeah, I can imagine it'd be
We've
very
heard
tough.
it's very complicated.
I mean, even just getting citizenship in the U.S. is extremely difficult, so I can't imagine transferring a professional license in addition to that. I bet that would be hard.
Especially for any type of short-term situation. Like, I feel like if you were going to go through all that, it would need to be for the long term, or at least a couple of years. Yep. So Matt said telehealth is based on the patient's location. Yeah, Matt, I went to a telehealth session at CSM actually and was learning more about that, and that's exactly why it would be perfect, because you would be treating patients who are in the U.S. because you'd have to have a license. Actually, fun fact, you have to have a license to treat in the state where the patient is. So you can't get on your laptop in Virginia and treat a patient in Nevada unless you have a license to treat in Nevada.
Yep.
Fun fact. So if you were, even if you are sitting in, China, or, well, maybe China's not a good example because they probably have rules about what you can do on the
Thailand.
computer.
Let's go with
Say
Thailand.
you were sitting in Thailand on your laptop and treating a patient in Virginia, as long as you have a Virginia license to treat patients in Virginia, you can treat that patient via telehealth.
Yeah.
So it would be a really cool option, and that's definitely something we are going to check into for the future. But so far we haven't.
All right, so thank you guys for joining. Hopefully that made sense. Hopefully that explains why we've chosen not to take international travel contracts and why we probably will not ever do that. If you guys have any questions or you have any suggestions for topics you want us to cover in the future, please send us a message. We've been doing these videos for about a year now, and sometimes we're running out of ideas to make videos about, so it's best for us to cover questions that we get commonly. So any suggestions, definitely reach out.
Like I said, we will still be doing our videos every week, pretty much, as long as we have good Wi-Fi connection while we're traveling in Latin America, so no worries. Last time we set off in Europe and everybody was saying, I'm so sorry to bother you on your vacation, and all these emails and messages, and we're like, no, like, you're not bothering us. We're still doing our thing.
We're still working.
We still travel. It's just our lifestyle. So please feel free to reach out. As always, if you guys are interested in getting started with travel therapy within the U.S. like we do, and you want to know which travel therapy agencies and recruiters that we work with, please send us a message, or you can just comment recruiters in this video, and we will shoot you a message back to help you get set up with some recruiters and companies that would work well for you. And again, this is just strictly talking about U.S.-based travel contracts.
Kiara said, when do you leave? We live March 11th, so we've got like 2.5 weeks or something.
Yeah, so we got a lot of planning and everything to do, but we're getting excited.
Yep.
So.
All right, so thank you guys for joining, and we'll see you hopefully next Sunday, as long as everything's going correctly.
Going as planned.
Yeah, going as planned. So we'll see you next week.
Thank you guys. Good night.
Bye.